Welcome, viewers. Episode 2, The Day Parliament Changed Governing the Principle. Most Australians believe the modern conflict began in a courtroom. It didn't. Others believe it began with activists, media campaigns, or public protests. It didn't. The collision began much earlier. It began the day Parliament altered the architecture itself, 2013, because legal systems rarely collapse from one dramatic event. They change when a governing principle is modified beneath a framework that people assume remains the same. You can't run on assumptions. The public often sees the outcome, rarely the alteration that produced it. You have to go to 2013. Now, the original framework was organised around a relatively straightforward proposition. Biological sex governed sex-based protections. It was just a natural creative principle. Nobody demanded it, nobody forced it, it was just the way that it was. Biological sex governed sex-based protections. And the protected category and the reason for the protection were aligned. Then Parliament expanded the framework in 2013. And the question's not whether protection from discrimination is good. Most Australians support protections from unjust treatment. The question's whether Parliament clearly explained what happened when the new protected characteristic eventually arrived at a boundary already organised around biological sex. And that's where the fault line begins. In 2013, Parliament introduced protections related to gender identity into a framework that already contained sex-based protections. So they've brought in they've tried to tag on another idealism to a biological framework that was never to be altered. And too many Australians, the amendment appeared compassionate. And this is where it all fell down. Okay, and this is where they've come up with, not particularly for this law, but this is where people have got to be more careful, damaging empathy. Because the amendment seemed compassionate, damaging compassionate, destructive compassion, being too soft. And so what would have happened is the transgenderists would have come along, all well behaved, all well in order, and they would have kept presenting themselves that way and build enough momentum inside Parliament to convince someone in Julia Gillard's squad and then Julia Gillard to amend the sex discrimination laws. It all seemed administrative, it all seemed reasonable, it all seemed technical. But few people ask the deeper question. What happens when both protected characteristics eventually claim authority over the same space? Because what happened is and this was where the Parliament completely missed it. when something comes in and it wants to intrude into a space that it doesn't belong, it's going to present itself as best as it can. It's going to chameleonize itself as best as it can. And Parliament's gone with it. But what it's done is it's given it a parallel authority, a parallel ability to govern, dictate and demand at the same level as the biological binary created position. Now let me give you an example, because it's coming. I'll give you this example. We have Australian law. We have Australian law, and that's how we expect people to integrate. But they're not going to integrate in the big picture of it. Overtly, they're going to demonstrate where necessary that they're integrating. But covertly, they're working as hard as they can to get in, one day, Sharia law. Right? You've only got to look at the UK on the other side of the world, and that's part of the Commonwealth, to see what's going on. Now, destructive empathy has allowed it to start to spread bit by bit. Okay, bit by bit, and then they start infiltrating political positions, and then they start seeping in demands for Sharia law, and the object is to make the Commonwealth law and Sharia law parallel, and then Sharia law to take over. Okay, the Sharia law and the Commonwealth law cannot work in a parallel conjunction, because they're two different kettles of fish. Completely different kettles of fish, and history's proven that Sharia law is just way too cruel, particularly towards women. All women. And if you're binary, if you're trans, you will be enlivened under Sharia law. So I've mentioned that because they can't, Sharia law and the Commonwealth law, Australia, British, whatever, they cannot co-join and have a successful nation, because the people, the natives of the land, will not accept it. Okay, they're not going to accept a lot of that Sharia stuff. Now, I'm not picking out I'm just trying to show you it won't work. Well, what's happened here is the trans people have come alongside the biological people, all nice and neat, and yeah, we'll work in together, and we'll all get this, we'll be unified, right? And then what happened was it became an invasion. Okay, now it may not have started out to be an invasion of collision, but it becomes so overwhelming, so penetrative, that somebody had to sing out and say, we've got to do something about it. Okay? We've got to do something. This is too much. Now, it hasn't never started out this way, but over time, 13 years, it's become too much, and we've got a collision. Now, who is the governing priority here? Well, now they've made it so that the transgender people have the same governing rights as the biological people. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Just like Sharia law and Australian law will not work as much as they say it just won't. It won't work. And this hasn't worked. Okay? The evolution of this hasn't worked. Because now we've got the trans people penetrating into the spaces and places where the biological people are saying, hang on a minute, right? They've let you in. It all started off nice and great and dandy, but now you want everything. You want everything to do with us, and you're not of us, right? Sharia law and Australian law. If they go as it starts to creep in, and then it starts to, what it'll do, it'll start to try and push its way over Australian law. You've got to see the principle behind this. It's going to come in all nice and neat, and people will influence other people, and and then all of a sudden, the Sharia law will start to try and overtake the Australian law. And once it's got that governance behind it through Parliament, there's not much the Australians are going to be able to do when they start genital circumcision and all the other horrible, brutalising stuff that it does. So on the same token, now what we've got are transgenderists pushing their weight around the biological dimension that they really don't belong in. Now, the women have said you can have 99%, you can play the game 99.9%, but leave our privacy alone. Leave that one thing alone, right? And at the start, that would have been fine. But not now. Not now. We're taken over. We've got the governance. We realise it. You want to take us on? Let's see. And what's happened is Parliament's given the transgenderists, I don't even know what you call them, transgenderists, the same governing power as the women. And they've gone, we're coming over the top of you. So at first, nothing appears to change. Going back to the original installment of this. The amendment sits quietly inside the legislation. Life continues. Institutions continue. The public barely notices, but legal architecture creates future consequences. 2026, 2020, when it all started to manifest. A bridge can contain a stress fracture long before the first visible crack appears. Okay, yeah, the fracture exists. Now, I was on a job, standing right next to the guy. We worked on these wooden planks for weeks, loading bricks and all the rest of it. The guy was as close as from those documents to here, and the next thing he was gone, completely gone, never to be the same again. 2 stories high, straight to the concrete. The inside of the planks were rotten, but you couldn't tell from the outside. It's exactly the same. What's happened is it's exactly the same. It's become with an outside appearance, but the internal part of it didn't belong with the same governance as the biological part. It just didn't belong. So over time, the collision points begin emerging. Women's sport, women's refuges, women's associations, women's support groups, women's digital spaces, women's privacy environments. It begins a takeover Okay, we've got a takeover. And the public starts arguing about outcomes. The deeper issue remains hidden. And then which characteristic governs the boundary? So now we come back to governance. Because the government didn't need to do this. They didn't need to give something that's not biological the same preeminence, the same power as that which is. That was the mistake they made. Because they didn't predict a takeover. They didn't predict disrespect. And because the trans will say they're being disrespected. But when you look at the governance of it, the creative governance of it, there's no way on earth that the trans should have or ever have been given the same preeminence as the biological woman. Because that would have just kept them in an element of restraint where you've got your choices, right? That's how you want to live. That's fine. Nobody's complaining about that. But there's parts of our biology that we want to protect. And they've gone, not anymore. Oh, not anymore, because we've been given governance, the same governance that you've got. So which characteristic governs the boundary? Biological sex or gender identity? Well, up until 2013, biological sex. After that, now we've got biological sex and gender identity with the same authority. And they didn't push that authority around at the start, but they are now. Oh yeah. And so the moment the question appears, the governing principle becomes uncertain. Who has the governance? The biological women or the gender identity? Well, both. Sadly to say, both. And once uncertainty enters a protected category, courts eventually become involved. So the word uncertainty is only in the sense that people are ignorant of the law that the amendments that Gillard brought in. There's no uncertainty about it. Ask Sal Grover, ask Kira Lee Smith, and others that have tried to go into the court on the basis of morality and have come out with just completely, basically, honestly, to be honest, in some way traumatized. Because they didn't expect that the law would uphold the authority that the transgenderists have, the equality that they have. In other words, these transgenderists can do and go wherever they like. Now, I'm going to bring up, I think we'll do it in the next one because I've gone way over time, the argument that they had in the Senate. I watched it live, where it comes to men trying to get into female refuges. And we'll come to that in the next talk, so don't miss that. That'll be straight after this. So the courts have been asked to resolve this, and they can't because it's in the law. And many women believe this is where the modern problem begins, not with the existence of transgender protections, but with the absence of a clearly understood rule explaining what happens when two protected characteristics arrive at the same doorway. Well, there's nothing blurred about it at the moment. The law added protection. It added protection for the transgenderists at the same level as the biological women. And many argue it did not clearly establish priority. And where priority remains unclear, conflict eventually follows. In other words, the biological women do not have priority by law over the transgender women. That's the law. That's why the courts are looking at these people and going, we understand your moral argument on biology. We understand all that, but we're bound by the law. These people have rights, and we've got to... So my closing statement for this part 2, the criticism of 2013 is not merely that new protections were added. The criticism is that a new protected characteristic was introduced into an existing sex-based framework without clearly explaining which characteristic would govern when both claimed authority over the same boundary. Reason being is, when they were pushing this in, of course the transgender people are going to say, we'll go with... And no. They were blindsided in their goodwill. The courtroom did not create the collision. The courtroom simply became the place where the collision could no longer be ignored. I'll see you in the next episode.